Geotechnical excavation drops over 23 meters down, right beneath Canada's active heart of power. A covert operation escapes the public eye. Above ground sits a static historical surface. Below lies an aggressive modern construction zone. The monumental stone facade dominates the skyline. A three-dimensional scan strips away the soil. A colossal void opens beneath the foundation. Heavy excavators chew through the solid bedrock. Low-frequency vibrations echo deep underground. The floor hums. This depth equals an 8-story building, completely submerged in the earth. Engineers face a massive structural paradox. Aggressive digging directly under a fragile landmark. Crews construct a unified infrastructure network. The old foundation requires total reconfiguration. Survival in the 21st century demands it. Absolute precision, zero deviations. One wrong move, no going back. The underground extraction removes exactly 40,000 cubic meters of solid limestone bedrock. This 23-meter abyss is not a mere spatial whim, but a desperate $5 billion United States dollar measure responding to the critical deterioration of the 1927 structures. Originally erected in 1859, the center block suffered a massive fire in 1916, leaving its historical base severely vulnerable. Engineers finished the reconstructed version 11 years later, and its heavy masonry stood resolute for nearly a century. But beneath the stone, the mortar steadily degrades. The structure is failing. Engineering assessments revealed absolute zero seismic resistance, meaning a moderate tremor could trigger an immediate catastrophic collapse. A nearly 100-year-old facade now drains a staggering $5 billion budget just to prevent a total structural failure. This intervention stands as the largest heritage conservation effort in the history of the country. Above-ground reinforcement proved impossible without permanently destroying the original architecture. Engineers had to abandon the surface entirely, sinking a multi-level infrastructure network deep into the bedrock. Penetrating the solid geological shield beneath the foundations remains the solitary path to save the complex. Though this aggressive excavation introduces severe new threats. Perched above the Ottawa River, the parliamentary precinct operates as a massive 3-part logistical machine. But due to the zero seismic resilience of the center block, this entire government network had to be decentralized. The Senate faced immediate forced evacuation. Spread across 22 acres of solid limestone, the east, west, and center blocks once functioned as a highly synchronized legislative engine. Now the system is paralyzed. The central node is offline. Instead of managing daily lawmaking, logistics teams had to physically sever the central structure from its flanks. They uprooted the Senate entirely, shifting its operations into the former government conference center down the street. Topographical isolation of the main building demanded severing decades-old underground utility tunnels and establishing a rigid barrier. The center block now sits as a quarantined island between its fully active sister structures. Workers locked the massive oak doors. Power grids inside the historic chambers went dark. Crews immediately sealed the exterior behind impenetrable steel fencing, physically locking down the building to begin the surgical intervention. Isolating the historic structure was only the prelude to a program designed to last over 1 decade and split into 3 rigid phases. This modernization targets the entire central parliamentary complex of Canada, functioning as a high-risk surgical operation on a national scale. The structural footprint spans an area larger than 3 professional football fields, yet the intervention affects every single wooden beam and stone pillar. Moving from a broad 10-year master plan to immediate physical demolition requires absolute precision. The shift is abrupt. The first stage dictates a brutal deconstruction phase deep within the contaminated core. Decades of accumulated hazardous materials require specialized handling before structural reinforcement can even begin. Hazmat teams extract toxic asbestos and lead paint while carefully navigating the fragile heritage architecture. They methodically seal the acrid dust of hazardous materials inside containment zones running on strict negative pressure. This atmospheric control prevents microscopic particles from escaping during the violent teardown process. Heavy machinery then systematically dismantles the interior floors to hollow out the center. The extraction completely strips the building down to its bare skeletal framework. With the toxic layer eliminated, the reconstruction stage focuses on heavily reinforcing the compromised skeleton. Structural engineers insert thick steel reinforcement grids directly into the newly exposed framework to upgrade the base against severe seismic activity. They secure the foundation and carve out space for deep underground infrastructure levels beneath the structure. A final fit-out stage will eventually restore the historical architectural elements while integrating modern operational networks behind the walls. However, before the delicate finishing touches can begin, in, the excavation crews face a far more brutal reality below the foundation. Heavy machinery maneuvers into the excavation trench to expose the vulnerable stone underbelly. Workers clear the immediate perimeter and lock the thick steel shields into position. The engines power down. A tense stillness settles over the exposed bedrock. The deconstruction phase hits its apex. Engineers transition to a brutal stage. Controlled explosions shatter the bedrock, directly beneath the historic facade. How do you blast solid granite without collapsing historic masonry overhead? The geopolitical stakes are immense. Total collapse looms. Errors mean ruin. Dull thuds echo. Shockwaves cleave the dense bedrock. Right beneath 1927 windows, the fragile facade absorbs vibrations. 23 meters of stone vanish. A trench 7 stories deep opens. The cut spans the front. Debris falls fast. Excavators clear the shattered rock. The void demands immediate reinforcement. Concrete pours begin. Heavy load-bearing walls rapidly rise. Elevator shafts take shape fast. Stair cores anchor the pit. The underground welcome center forms. Bedrock is gone. The massive excavation fully exposes the highly vulnerable historic foundation, shifting this unprecedented engineering project into a critical, high-risk zone. The roar of open excavation gives way to high-precision, deadly dangerous mechanics. Engineers face a terrifying paradox. They must keep the monumental center block from collapsing while methodically obliterating the old foundation directly beneath it. The building is over 100 years old. It has no structural basement. To create modern subterranean space, the entire stone megastructure must be completely severed from the earth. The physics of this load transfer demands surgical accuracy. Heavy hydraulic jacks engage. Massive temporary support frames absorb the crushing downward forces. Cold steel shrieks under the sudden weight of the parliament. The building hangs in midair. Below this suspended masonry, heavy machinery drives 800 foundation piles deep into the ground. Connected by thick metal bracing, these load-bearing clusters form a dense underground steel forest. Crews carefully excavate the remaining dirt between these towering metal trunks. The raw earth vanishes. A modern reinforced concrete grid gradually takes its place from the bottom up. This creates a brutal mechanical standoff. 800 steel piles and 500 seismic base isolators stand directly against the sheer mass of a century-old architectural giant. Technicians precisely insert the isolators between the historic superstructure above and the new subterranean grid below. Each bearing features alternating layers of vulcanized rubber and steel plates wrapped around a solid lead core. They act as colossal mechanical buffers, designed to deform laterally and absorb extreme kinetic energy before those vibrations can shatter the fragile heritage stone. The temporary shoring finally drops away. The immense weight settles. 500 engineered shock absorbers are now the only thing protecting the historic structure from total collapse. 500 isolators secure the foundation. Danger looms at the opposite end. At the Peace Tower peak, foundation shifts mean destruction. 4 stone pinnacles, each heavy as a loaded truck, could detach. Gravity takes over. High-altitude wind whips the ropes. Technicians rappel down. They slide over massive glass clock faces. Methods are brutal. Thick straps wrap the ancient stone. Workers anchor them to the flagpole base. Brute force meets fragile history. Rough industrial canvas is not enough. The architecture is over 100 years old. One wrong drill below destroys the facade. Precision is vital. Sensors track micro-vibrations on the dials. 500 vibration sensors form a digital web. Limits are strict. The network tracks every single tremor. The system allows 0 deviations. Now, a silent watch begins. The sensor network continuously monitors the historic frame, standing ready to trigger an alarm at the very first micromillimeter of structural movement. 500 vibration sensors might secure the steel macro frame, but the exterior demands a completely different approach. At the micro level, saving 365,000 decaying stone blocks, a structural puzzle with a total mass equivalent to a fully loaded cargo ship, requires highly advanced, non-contact technologies. The original sandstone is severely weathered. Mechanical scrubbing would simply shatter the brittle surface. Instead, technicians deploy high-energy neodymium lasers. The device fires ultra short nanosecond pulses of focused infrared light. The beam hits the contaminated crust. A microscopic plasma layer erupts. This intense energy instantly vaporizes decades of hardened carbon pollution, exposing the original pristine stone texture beneath. The surrounding air immediately fills with the sharp, acrid smell of incinerated Victorian dirt. Outside the thin scaffolding, heavy excavators grind aggressively against the bedrock. Brutal machinery noise echoes across the yard, yet the cleaning process proceeds without a single physical strike on the masonry. Zero friction, absolute preservation. Inside the walls, the building is stripped bare to its primary structural skeleton. Within this chaotic industrial shell lies a striking paradox. While massive rotary drills tear through the solid foundation below, conservationists meticulously shield 20,000 fragile heritage assets directly above them. Dozens of heavily modified functional chambers are compressed into one sprawling active construction zone. Here, brutal structural intervention meets microscopic jewelry work. 250 historic stained glass windows undergo strict forensic restoration. Delicate lead framing and brittle colored glass are treated, while thousands of tons of steel are shifted just meters away. The decorative arts team sweeps across the complex. From the east wing to the west, they physically evaluate every crumbling contour. Specialists map the eroded structural elements, logging decades of severe weather damage into the structural grid. The continuous process of scanning, cataloging, and restoring hundreds of intricate sculptural details pushes forward right now. While directed laser ablation maps and cleans 365,000 exterior masonry blocks, an entirely different operational protocol governs the most sensitive interior zone. Behind the heavy central axis lies the Library of Parliament, a neo-Gothic cylinder standing as the solitary architectural survivor of a catastrophic failure. In 1916, a massive fire consumed the entire main parliamentary complex, reducing the political headquarters to ash within a matter of hours. The library survived the extreme thermal event only because heavy iron barrier doors were manually secured before the corridor temperatures reached critical limits. The stakes are immense. Today, this century-old artifact presents an extreme engineering challenge due to its highly vulnerable material composition and irreplaceable historical status. The architectural envelope consists of an intricate geometry of high-angled vaulted ceilings constructed entirely from dry, aged timber. Hand-carved wooden bookcases wrap continuously around the circular perimeter, displaying a highly textured surface of white pine that responds unpredictably to any external ambient vibration. This combustible, load-bearing matrix carries the accumulated mechanical stress of more than 1 century, making the physical intervention highly delicate and logistically complicated. Every single seismic frequency generated by the deep foundation excavation outside transfers directly toward these fragile, interlocking joints. The ambient air within the chamber carries the faint smell of aged wood polish, while the acoustic profile of the room amplifies even the slightest mechanical frequency. Geotechnical engineers must carefully navigate the precarious balance between necessary foundation reinforcement and the immediate risk of fracturing the historical woodwork. Preserving this sole surviving historical witness requires implementing an invasive structural framework without compromising the delicate surface tension of the century-old interior. The ongoing rehabilitation project introduces a rigid steel scaffolding matrix to lock the wooden vaults in an immobile state before any heavy mechanical drilling begins in the adjacent zones. Sensors monitor the structural displacement of the neo-Gothic archways down to the millimeter, ensuring the complex geometry remains firmly suspended above the active construction footprint. The risk is constant. Rather than modifying the handcrafted surfaces, construction crews work deep beneath the original foundation slab to isolate the entire library from the surrounding bedrock. Upgrading the internal environment involves threading specialized ventilation conduits through existing masonry voids to stabilize the ambient humidity directly around the most sensitive timber components. The continuous threat of structural degradation mandates these extreme containment protocols across every square inch of the preserved historical interior. The massive archival collections are continuously shielded from particulate matter, while the heavy mechanical upgrades are physically integrated into the perimeter footprint. The permanent implementation of modern environmental control measures and custom seismic protection plates into the original load-bearing walls will mechanically decouple the century-old room from future geological shifts. The intense engineering interventions required to secure the historical library and suspend the main structural footprint dictate a harsh reality. Human presence becomes completely impossible. This spatial conflict triggers an extensive administrative evacuation across the parliamentary campus. The entire legislative apparatus of a Group of 7 nation must abandon its primary operational base. How does a national administration maintain control when its core is a hazardous excavation site? Thousands of staff members, classified communication networks, and secure archives require immediate geographical displacement. Heavy structural work physically shuts down the traditional political hub. The House of Commons and the Senate are completely relocated. Every legislative session shifts to reinforced backup structures. The original core is empty. Surrounding historical blocks absorb the sudden displaced operational load. Temporary support facilities now handle all daily parliamentary duties. The central complex transitions entirely into an active heavy construction zone. Cranes and scaffolding replace daily legislative sessions. Industrial noise overrides political debate. The physical scale of this internal demolition demands extreme timeframes. The extensive rehabilitation program strictly isolates the main building behind security perimeters. The central block remains completely offline. Construction crews target the initial structural completion exclusively for the year 2031. Full operational reopening delays until the year 2032. The seismic threat to the central complex triggered an immediate chain reaction, forcing engineers to convert the early 20th century Ottawa Union Station into a shielded bunker. Built in the classic Beaux-Arts style, the historic transit hub required massive modifications to meet classified security protocols. The camera drops from the massive vaulted ceilings down toward the reinforced steel nodes concealing modern security infrastructure. The sheer volume of the passenger terminal contrasts against the extreme density of encrypted data networks. The acoustic environment shifts as the resonant transit echo is absorbed by thick soundproofing inside the new Senate chamber. 100 years of historical masonry collides directly with the exact tolerances of modern surveillance matrices. Main conduits initialize. Blast doors lock. While the Senate secured the station facility, the West Block demanded aggressive structural intervention. Engineers must enclose the open courtyard for the new House of Commons. The solution requires a massive roof of modern steel and structural glass. The engineering risk is high. Heavy contemporary materials must integrate with deteriorating 19th century masonry. The physical junction reveals the tension. Precision columns distribute the downward force. Steel meets fragile stone. Tolerances approach zero. This translucent canopy protects the historical envelope below. Natural daylight illuminates the entire parliamentary floor. The reinforced glass panels support heavy environmental surface loads. While surface structures resolved capacity issues, the 19th century East Block demanded invasive geotechnical intervention. The Gothic Revival masonry is highly vulnerable to ground vibrations. Preserving the original layout, including the intact office of Sir John A. Macdonald, necessitates strict structural monitoring. Foundation failure remains a constant threat. Machinery extracts bedrock beneath the heritage footings to construct a modern underground circulation network. The historical timeline shifts from the preserved wooden interiors to the active excavation zone, where an access shaft plunges into the unlit tunnel. Every newly carved tunnel converges. East and west routes merge. They meet at one node, the subterranean Welcome Center. This is the central hub. Threat detection starts right here. Screening zones dissect incoming traffic. Security protocols isolate every visitor. Descent begins. Scanner arrays process biometric data. Traffic flows split into channels. The view glides further downward. Earth blocks the surface. Below, blinding daylight floods in. Massive skylights pierce the ceiling. Sunlight strikes. Visual contrast hits. Sleek modern lines suddenly stop. Rough limestone cuts the space. The historic foundation sits bare. Engineers expose the original bedrock. Heritage stone radiates deep cold. Air handlers regulate the chill. Steel columns support everything. Weight transfers downward. Sensors monitor the ancient masonry. Zero shifts occur. Vibration limits remain strictly enforced. Parliamentarians use isolated transit pathways. Public routes remain completely separated. Ballistic glass divides the zones. Sensors track. The excavation hollowed out limestone. 32,000 square meters exist. Rock anchors stabilize the perimeter. Pumps operate constantly. The cavern runs deep underground. 23 meters below street level. Reinforced concrete seals the envelope. Atmospheric pressure remains tightly controlled. Thick steel beams span overhead. They carry the courtyard payload. Load distribution requires exact geometry. The facade hangs above. Geotechnical drills pierce the stone. Steel micropiles anchor the base. Hydraulic jacks hold the load. Tension remains constant. Blast-resistant glass forms the roof. Optics bend the incoming light. Direct upward views remain clear. The tower looms. The underlying shale is brittle. Microfractures threaten the ancient footings. Grouting stabilizes the weakest zones. Cement fills cracks. Chemical resins harden within minutes. The historical masonry absorbs them. Structural integrity increases tenfold immediately. Decay stops. Acoustic panels dampen the echoes. Thousands of people will transit. Noise control demands specialized engineering. Thermal dynamics shift every hour. Humidity sensors blanket the walls. Excess moisture triggers extraction fans. Dry air pumps downward continuously. Climate remains stable. Heat recovery units manage temperatures. Ventilation shafts run completely hidden. Electrical conduits snake through bedrock. Power flows silently. Security gates deploy in milliseconds. Magnetic locks secure the perimeter. Access requires strict physical clearance. 3 million annual visitors will navigate this fortified subterranean depth of 23 meters. This deep subterranean node guarantees one critical outcome. When lawmakers return to these Gothic stone halls, their legislative environment will rely on 21st century seismic armor. Over 1 century of fragile memory is encased within a rigid steel grid. The Peace Tower stands secure. The footprint is locked. Hazards are neutralized. Every historic block now meets strict operational demands. Citizens will soon reoccupy this heavily fortified architecture. How will other aging legislative centers survive modern structural threats? The upcoming Palace of Westminster restoration confronts similar massive structural deficits.